Bayonetta 3 goes big for the series' most stupendous adventure yet, but it's also its scrappiest. Martin Robinson, editor-in-chief of Eurogamer, has played Bayonetta 3 and has passed on his impressions to yours truly. So, allow me, Zoe Delahunty-Light, to tell you why Bayonetta 3 is a messy melange that just about retains Platinum Games' magic. Here's our spoiler-free Bayonetta 3 review. I'll get this bit out of the way right now. Much has already been said about the murky circumstances involving the situation around Bayonetta's original voice actor, and it's too much to dive into in any real detail here, though I will say this one thing. Jennifer Hale's take is noticeably different to Helena Taylor's, and while it did take some time to adjust to, I'd honestly say it's no better or worse. Anyway, onto the review. Since its inception, Bayonetta has been many things. Sexy, stylish, and most of all brilliantly stupid, but reserved is not one of them. This is an action game in which you press a button and then watch the screen explode in flashes of orgasmic action, where climax is piled atop of climax, and I'm gonna need to stop myself right there because otherwise this is gonna get demonetized. It would honestly be exhausting if it wasn't quite so exhilarating. Bayonetta 3 doesn't change any of that. Indeed, it's as bombastic, overstated, and over the top as this series has ever been, and by extension, perhaps the most outrageous thing Platinum Games has produced yet. It's also, though, its most unrefined. Because for all its considerable charms, Bayonetta 3 is a bit of a mess. A charming, frequently dazzling mess, but a mess all the same. Maybe that's inevitable in a sequel that throws everything it can at the player, piling in one idea after the other until the whole thing visibly buckles. There is a story here, but I'm not going to try and make too much sense of it. However, if you have been keeping up with the Bayonetta games, then have no fear. You'll be rewarded with face-offs against old favourites and a whole host of cameos that I will not spoil here, not least because there are some incredibly restrictive review guidelines that I'm going to try and tiptoe around. What's important is that there's a multiverse under threat, meaning there are multiple worlds to save, and meaning that there's no shortage of new surroundings to tear apart in a series of spectacular set pieces. Once more, there are restrictive guidelines stopping me from telling you the real highlights of Bayonetta 3, though that's probably for the best to keep some things a surprise, so I'll keep it as vague as possible without being incomprehensible. There are rooftop chases across the rapidly deforming skyscrapers of Tokyo, shootouts that take place atop skittering demon spiders, and kaiju fights that introduce a brand new, ridiculous level of scale and spectacle to Bayonetta. Given the amount Bayonetta 3 fits into its dozen-ish hours of action, I could go on indefinitely, but the best way to describe it is, ironically, indescribable. And yeah, I know that doesn't make much sense, but it's hard to put these spectacles into words, as these are set pieces that have to be savoured firsthand and seen to be believed. Beyond these frequent set pieces, the fundamentals have changed far more drastically in Bayonetta 3 than they did between the first two games. The most profound change is the ability to directly control the demons Bayonetta calls upon in battle, with this leashing of otherworldly demons being named the Demon Slaves mechanic, which plays to that ludicrous sense of scale and indulgence that's the thrust of Bayonetta 3. In terms of ramping up the ridiculousness of the action, the Demon Slaves are an absolute triumph. There's the towering Madama Butterfly, whose fists are the size of Bayonetta herself, or the fearsome Gamora, a 30-foot-tall dragon who fills the screen and makes it shake with fury upon being summoned. Can relate. They're outrageous, though none of them are more so than the War Train Guon, and yes, you heard me correctly. It's not so much a demon, rather a full-sized steam train that can be called upon like that cursed Skyrim mod that turns its dragons into Thomas the Tank Engine. Choo choo. An infernal demon tied to an all-new weapon, the Dead End Express, War Train Guon is Bayonetta at its most ridiculous, although I sense I didn't have to mention that because it's a frickin' steam train. You clobber enemies with a hefty locomotive engine before transforming into a train and quite literally steaming into mobs. You really couldn't make this kind of stuff up. Truth is stranger than fiction, and the blending of the two is where Bayonetta 3 lands. This is Bayonetta Thomas the Tank Engine Edition, a premise as delirious as it is delightful. It's this breathlessness that makes Bayonetta 3 such a blast. In certain parts, that is. Okay, now onto the not so good stuff. That breathlessness I mentioned can come across as straight up wheeziness at times. Controlled chaos has always been Bayonetta's calling card, but Bayonetta 3 frequently loses a handle on the action and, as a result, feels clumsy and messy. When playing as Bayonetta, the camera is more distant than in previous games, partly to help accommodate the demon slaves that are a foundational part of her new arsenal, but the result is combat that's often illegible. Press a button and the screen explodes, as is the series' credo. However, in Bayonetta 3, it's way too easy to lose sight of yourself in all of that noise. To be honest with you, that's me holding back somewhat. Bayonetta 3 is far more than just noisy. Too often, it's a downright mess. It's tempting to put some blame on the aging hardware Platinum Games is tied to, and the ambition here certainly isn't helped by technical limitations, but just as often it seems to be undone by fuzzy implementation and murky visual design. Criminally, for a series that's defined by its effervescent fizz, all of that visual fuss manages to fall flat. Take new addition to the cast, Viola, a katana-wielding witch in training who fights alongside a cat big enough to earn a place in the Macy's parade, and who offers a stripped-back moveset as an interesting counterpoint to the heady excess of Bayonetta's sequences. All that would be well and good if Viola wasn't such an underwritten, under-designed absence of a character, savage but true. Her wardrobe a melange of second-hand offcuts that might be the whole point of it, and yet those pieces don't even complement each other in a ragtag way. Plus, her second-hand punky attitude is delivered in half-arsed quips like a late-phase Marvel movie. Quipping and punk do not, and should not, go together. Viola is just mediocre. Being in close proximity to Bayonetta, as close to video game royalty as it gets to be honest, was always going to be a challenge, but the disappointment and misses exuding from Viola extend out to some underwhelming sections, full of clumsy platforming and lazy puzzling in environments that look distinctly second-rate. All throughout playing Bayonetta 3, there's this recurring suspicion that it might simply be attempting too much, a feeling underlined by the existence of 3 separate currencies in Bayonetta 3, with one for items, one for unlockable cosmetics, and somehow another that powers the skill tree that lets you unlock new abilities, or skill trees even, as every single character gets their own one in a web of menus that's inelegant and a visual mess. It's that elegance that's missing most in Bayonetta 3. With so much going on screen, the sense of overriding style that's held the series together in the past is often in danger of coming apart at the seams. Bayonetta 2 was a refinement of what's gone before, which makes Bayonetta 3 an explosion, the resulting action being loud and brash, but also jagged and occasionally incoherent. What a mess it is. I'm conflicted, as although Bayonetta 3 might not be as consistently brilliant as its predecessors, when it's in full flow, it's next to godly. Playing as Bayonetta with her entire suite of toys unlocked is as electrifying as it's ever been, a spectacle of sinewy combat and S&M excess that's uniquely, defiantly video games distilled into one hair crystal entity thing. It's so over the top that even trying to make sense of Bayonetta 3 would be a mistake, and while the rough edges are a disappointment, if you embrace the chaos, there's a lot to love here. Bayonetta 3 is overstated, in parts underbaked, but never less than an absolute thrill. So, that's what the lucky Martin Robinson at Eurogamer thinks of Bayonetta 3. Do you think you'll buy Bayonetta 3? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, thanks very much, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Eurogamer as we have a new video out almost every single day. Now, I'm going to go and try and catch some more glimpses of Cheshire, as despite Viola not hitting the mark, I still love her big chubbo feline, so I'll see you lot next time.